So if you're watching this, you probably finished Space Marine 2, and maybe you played it with your kids in a co-op campaign. Look, I'm not going to judge. I play M-rated games with my kids all the time. As long as they realize that it's fantasy and not reality, and that, you know, that the Space Marines are still kinda not the good guys, and it's all good. I won't judge you. But at this point, depending on how much you guys enjoyed the game, you're probably looking at the Warhammer miniatures, you're looking at the tabletop war game, and you're asking yourself, how can I get into this, and how can I get my kids into this?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
Step on it, Daddy!
Hey there everyone, YouTube game Horace Lupercal here, back at it again, starting another Civil War debate-sized debate. Trying to get your kids into Warhammer is like trying to hire a Nurgle-based cleaning service. It's just going to end up messy, things are going to end up broken, and it's just not going to be a good time. So in this video, I'm going to kind of talk about Warhammer as a tabletop game. I'm going to talk about why you shouldn't teach your kids how to play Warhammer, and I'm going to give you some alternatives that are just as good, if not better, in some aspects, especially for younger players. So if that sounds like your jam, go ahead and keep watching, and also, as always, like, share, subscribe, support the small guys, and yeah, let's get into it. So right off the bat, I will say that I absolutely love Warhammer. I got into it during the pandemic, just like a lot of other people, and in this time, I have basically enveloped myself in what people would call, quote-unquote, the hobby. This includes painting the miniatures, I have done kit bashing, taking other pieces and putting them together, I build my own terrain, hell, I even have a resin and an FDM printer for printing out my own miniatures and my own terrain. It is very easy for me to say that Warhammer introduced me to like 5 other hobbies, and they all just like coalesce and mesh with each other in this very beautiful creative outlet. But the actual game itself is just, in my opinion, not that great. The way that it works in terms of its monetization model, the actual rules themselves for the game, and just the constant updates that can only be found in very specific places, it just makes it way more work than it's really worth. So let's go ahead and rewind to earlier this year. You are essentially just a variant of me. Not as good looking, but you know, you're at least partly me, so you got some of that. You spent $250 on the Leviathan Warhammer 10th edition starter box set. You got the miniatures all put together, and you got them all painted, which is something I never did. They're still all unpainted. But then you break out the 200+ page rulebook, and you start going through it, and you start reading it out loud to your kids, trying to explain to them how to play this game. And let's be honest, your kid just wants to move some Space Marines and some Tyranids around. So what are you gonna do? Are you either going to force them to adhere to all these rules, or are you just gonna really chop something together and just start playing with them? Assuming that you're watching this video, that means that you either want to be a good parent or you are a good parent, so I'm going to assume that you're just gonna chop up some rules and go from there. And here's what ends up happening during the typical life cycle of a 40K edition, from everything that I've seen and heard and talked to. You spent weeks learning your faction's codex, and then one day, Games Workshop decides to just drop a new FAQ, and all of the rules have been completely upended and changed. So first off, all that material you got in the Leviathan box set is all completely out of date and useless, but you also either have to alter those cards to have the correct information, or you're gonna have to get all new cards. So what do you do when you tell your kid this? Do you basically just tell them to ignore it and keep playing the way that they're used to, or do you force them to adhere to the standard of Games Workshop? And now you finally got to a point where you feel like you are comfortable enough that you can actually set up a game and guide your kid through it, and you look down at your table and it is just completely covered in FAQs, core rules, codices, chapter approved content, extra rules from White Dwarf, and you're looking at all this and you're looking at the look on your kid's face like, why would you do this to yourself and why would you do this to them?
Think, Mark!
Like, okay, I guess the easiest way to really sum this all up, you know that episode of South Park where they play Warhammer and they're just sitting at the table reading the books back and forth to each other? That is Warhammer. That is the tabletop game. And you add in the fact that the entire activation phase is I go, you go, meaning that one side moves all of their units before the other side goes, it just can get so boring and just little to no interaction at all because you're just sitting there waiting for the other side to do all their stuff, looking up their rules, rolling dice, and oh my god, I'm not even going to get into roll to hit, roll to do damage, and all that. It's just too much. The whole thing just creates a snowball effect, and that's how Games Workshop kind of traps you in their ecosystem. The rules interact with each other in unintuitive ways, which requires frequent rulebook consultation or debates. The frequent updates in the meta and new releases can dramatically change strategies and the way that you build your army, which requires constant adaptation. And every 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years, you're going to be expecting a new edition, which means a new overhaul of the rules. And keeping up with these rules often means purchasing new books and new models regularly to make sure that you are using everything that is compliant with the meta. And on top of all of this, you also have the time investment of either painting your miniatures, making them all thematically coherent, and just the overall time investment of learning the rules and staying up to date with everything. It's a lot for adults and new players coming into this hobby, so why would you curse your kid with that type of forbidden knowledge? So at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, this guy really hates the Warhammer tabletop game. And yeah, in a way, I kinda do. A lot of it just is really goes against a lot of just my personal way that I like to do things. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what do you suggest if you know better? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because yes, I do know better. And let's start off with first off the superior rule set that is OnePageRules. Now, I will say quite literally, OnePageRules is the reason that I got into Warhammer. I was introduced to it from a video from Wylock's Armory, like way back in 2020 or so, and the way that he explained it was so simple that I had a very basic understanding of the rules by watching his one video that I think was like 30 minutes or so.
Roll to hit, roll to defend, remove casualties. That's it in a nutshell. Every unit has a quality, a defense, and one or more weapons. Each weapon will tell you how many attacks it has, or how many dice to roll.
The advantage of OnePageRules over the traditional Games Workshop path is very simple and can be broken down into 3 words: simplicity, gameplay, frugality. So OnePageRules was made back in 2015 by a fella named Gianto Ferreira. I'm sorry if I butchered that, but OnePageRules was created as a simplified alternative to complex wargaming systems like Warhammer. The core philosophy, well, it's not their direct core philosophy, it's basically free to start, easy to learn. It is miniatures agnostic, which means you can use whatever models you like, including action figures, dinosaur toys, Lego figs, stuff like that. The core rules, which are, like I said, free, are 1 page front and back. And those are free and being constantly updated, so you don't have to pay anything to get started. And if you end up liking the flow of the system and you want something that is a bit more complex in terms of interactions, whether you want to have like garrison buildings or different types of reactions and stuff like that, the advanced rulebook is $5 online. That's it, just $5. And if you buy it through a site like DriveThruRPG, you get those updates in perpetuity until they stop making the game. Also, those advanced rules for OnePageRules, they top out at 50 pages, which is a lot more digestible than just the 200 pages of the core rulebook itself. And yes, I know a lot of it is also lore and fluff and stuff like that, and it's probably only about 75 pages or so of the core rules, but guess what? That just kind of proves my point, doesn't it? And if you want to support OnePageRules financially, you can do so via their Patreon. They have 2 tiers, a $5 and a $10. And here's the thing, with the $10 tier, you get STL files that you can print out yourself every month. When I was a regular patron of OnePageRules, they were doing this thing where they would give you miniatures for 2 different armies every month, and we're talking like 10 to 15 different units for 2 armies every month for $10. To really just emphasize this cost effectiveness here, for the $250 that I spent on the Warhammer 40k Leviathan starter box would provide me with 25 months of OnePageRules Patreon support, 2 years of Patreon support, and in that time, I have amassed nearly 1 terabyte worth of models and files and terrain and all sorts of stuff that I've gotten from OnePageRules over that time. And that also includes paper miniatures and paper terrain, which is a lot more accessible for a lot of people and probably a better way to see if you really want to invest your time and money into an actual wargaming hobby. And their different games are basically just very similar to the Games Workshop games that you know and love to hate, but with just a lot of the serial numbers filed off and someone took like a Sharpie and just wrote in some new numbers. It's great. And if you take the time to look around, there are literally dozens of indie games and smaller games that do a lot more interesting stuff and tell some really cool stories, but without having to have all that initial investment. For example, 5 Parsecs from Home and 5 Leagues from the Borderlands, which are both by Modifius. And I would say that these are more like story-driven war games. You create your little group, you give them all backstories and connections, and then you go off on randomly generated adventures. It sounds a lot like D&D, but it's really just smaller scale wargaming. It's fantastic stuff. And then here on YouTube land, we have Snarling Badger Studios, which is by 2 YouTubers, Tabletop Minions and Vince Venturella. And they have been making a lot of really great solo and co-op games that are miniatures agnostic that cover a wide array of just different themes and stuff. Like, I really do think if you're going to be spending hundreds of dollars on this stuff, you can get a lot more value by going with the lesser known people. You can get better value miniatures, you can get more of them for the same amount of money, you can get more interesting games, and all these models can just be used interchangeably with each other. Like, if you try to go to a Warhammer meetup, a Warhammer weekly game, there's a good chance that depending on where you go, they're not going to let you play unless you have official Warhammer miniatures. That's dumb. That's stupid. That's doo-doo. So we're going to encourage something that allows a lot more creativity, a lot more expression, and just a lot more frugality in practice, because this hobby is stupid expensive, and anything we can do to make it more affordable for everyone else is going to be better. And because of the more DIY nature of something like OnePageRules or a Snarling Badger game, it almost kind of encourages you to start learning how to do more of these crafting hobbies. Like I said in the beginning, I have learned how to do 3D printing with resin, 3D printing with filament, and then from there I have learned how to paint miniatures, I have learned how to build terrain, I have learned how to do all sorts of cool crafty stuff. And it wouldn't have been for the fact that I didn't want to spend so much money on these Games Workshop ones. I don't know if I can really express enough in depth in regards to how many hobbies this one hobby got me into. And from there, me learning how to do all these things, it got my kids into these hobbies as well. They enjoy playing war games, but only at certain scales because flipping between rules is really boring. They enjoy painting the miniatures because they can express themselves and paint a freaking Chaos Terminator in a trans flag colors, which is completely awesome. And from there, my kids are learning kind of like the very basics of mechanics while I'm sitting there trying to repair a 3D printer, and I'm showing them how the filament is fed through, how it heats up in the nozzle and melts and then lays down a line. And they get that. They understand how that all works. And my oldest is in 5th grade. So thank you, Warhammer, for teaching me how to do all this other stuff, because of the fact that you just suck outside of the lore. I think I'm getting like way too heated and way off track, so I'm just gonna kind of start bringing it home now. If you want to start getting your kids into the Warhammer tabletop game, don't. Start with OnePageRules. Start with those Warhammer Adventure Kids books, which if you want me to review those and kind of talk about those, somebody leave a comment and then everyone else like that comment so I know, and that'll boost the algorithm and all that stuff. But my advice to any parent that ever asked me about getting their kids into the hobby like I have, I'm gonna tell them, introduce them to Warhammer lore, get them those Warhammer Adventure books, they're pretty good, and then just start with OnePageRules. Don't even touch anything else, because it's not worth it.
Look what they need to mimic a fraction of our power.
And the money you end up spending, you could just get like a couple 3D printers and go ham. Also, developing those DIY and crafting skills will also make for a great weekend activity with your kids. Taking the time to build different terrain that you guys then can use to battle and tell stories, and to make it even more of a bonding experience. Like, I can't go back in time and give myself advice on how to restart this journey in a more mindful way. So I will give you guys my advice on how to start this journey in a more mindful way. Do all the stuff I said earlier in the video. Find the most frugal way to get into this hobby. Try it out with your kids and make sure it's something that you're actually gonna want to spend time doing before you invest hundreds of dollars into it. Especially if you're the type like me and that your neurodivergence causes you to go all in on a hobby and to buy everything before you get started. Yeah, this will help you in that shame. Start small. I always recommend starting at skirmish level. Maybe start with a co-op based game so that way you guys can all learn together. And on top of that, like I said, miniatures agnostic. If you're really interested, there is actually a tabletop war game called Brick Wars, which is all about using your bricks and minifigs to battle as well. I've looked through a couple of the pages and it seems really cool, but for those who have extensive collections, that might be right up your alley. And just take your time, focus more on the storytelling, focus more on having fun than trying to do like this weird competitive min-maxing nonsense. Your kid's not old enough for that, so don't start getting them with that. Don't be a capital G gamer with your capital K kid. Oh, and the last thing I would probably recommend, just buy a whole bunch of cheap dice online, whether it be from Amazon or your local game store or whatever. Get as many cheap dice as you can before you start worrying about like getting fancy personalized sets. Because for a good chunk of the while, when you start introducing those dice into your home, you're gonna be finding them everywhere. And especially like the D3s, those can kill you. A D3 can kill you if you step on it. Don't look it up, just trust me on this. All right, let's go to the stand-up now and let's wrap this home. All right, if you've made it this far, you've made it to the end of the video, which means that I owe you a very big thank you. We are in my car right now. I just picked up my 10-year-old from a birthday party. They're actually holding my phone right now, recording this. So if you leave a like and a subscribe and you share this, you're putting food on their table. And if you don't do that, you are taking food away from their table. So that's on you, not on me. And also, leave a comment about some of your favorite noob-friendly, younger player-friendly war games. I never talked about Rangers of Shadow Deep, Kings of War, Infinity. There's just so much good stuff out there that isn't Warhammer, and it is just way more frugal. You save a lot more money. So yeah, give me your thoughts. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.